Hello and welcome back to another Touring Teacher lesson video. Today we have a fun poetry lesson learning how to write narrative poems. I chose to do narrative poems because you guys loved the narrative writing series that I did last week. So you can have a look at those as well. And I thought we could get a little bit more poetic today. Alright, before we get started, make sure you give this video a like and click subscribe for more content just like this. Let's get started. Okay, so today we're talking about narrative poetry, but what actually is a narrative poem? Well, a narrative poem is a poem that tells a story. This could be a long story or a short one. It could be about anything, as long as it has a beginning, middle, and end. Let me read for you my example of my narrative poem. There once was a cat named Bob. He was always sleeping on the job. His work was to catch the mice, but his nature was just too nice. A rat came in their house one day, and poor old Bob ran away. The next morning, Bob came back to watch the rat and plan his attack. With a meow and a hiss, the rat ran squeaking, so brave old Bob could go back to sleeping. Alright, so that was my example, and I think some of you were able to register what were some of the things that we need to include in our narrative poems. Did you notice the rhyming? Of course you did. Now let's have a look at some of the other rules we need to follow when we're writing narrative poetry. So what do we need to include in a narrative poem? Well, it needs to tell a story. It needs to have a beginning, middle, and end. It needs to include characters. Needs to include a setting. It needs to have a problem and a resolution. There needs to be rhyming, and it needs to include interesting words. Alright, so let's have a closer look at my example and see if we can spot some of those rules or criteria in my poem. So the very first thing you can see is I've got a beginning, middle, and end, and I've broken it into different colors. You can also see that I've got some rhyming words, so every 2 lines they rhyme with each other. You can also see that I've got characters. Bob the cat is the character, but there's also the rat, which is also a character. Alright, you can tell that there is a setting, which is Bob the cat's workplace, and then there is a problem and a resolution. The problem is the rat came along and poor old Bob ran away, but the resolution is that Bob came back and he meowed and he hissed and the rat ran away squeaking. So that is our resolution. And I tried to include some interesting words, so I included the word nature. Alright, so now it's time for you to start writing your own narrative poem. Now the very first thing that we need to do is we need to pick our characters and we need to pick our setting, because that's going to help us with the whole story. So for your characters, you could pick animals, people, or maybe a mythical made-up creature. And then for the setting, you could talk about some place in the wild. It could be a house, could be a restaurant, could be a made-up land. It could be anything. Alright, and now the second thing that we need to do is figure out what's going to happen in the beginning of the story, the middle of the story, and the end of the story. And that's going to help us space out our poem and make sure it all makes sense. Alright, so in the beginning part, this is when you want to introduce your characters and you want to talk about your setting. In the middle, there needs to be a problem that happens. And in the end, this is the resolution to the problem. And there needs to be a nice ending that wraps up the whole poem. Alright, in my beginning paragraph, or the beginning part of my narrative poem, I introduce the character Bob the cat, and I introduce the setting that is the workplace. In the middle part of my narrative poem, this is when I had my problem. And the problem was that the rat came in and poor old Bob ran away. In the end, this is when I had my resolution to the problem. And this is when Bob was brave and he came back and he made the rat run away. And then the nice ending is that Bob just goes back to sleep, which kind of ties into the beginning of my poem. Okay, so now you have seen how I have written my narrative poetry, and you can see how I've spaced it out and how I've chosen my characters and my setting and what to include in the beginning, middle, and the end. So now it's just your turn to start writing your poem. So on the next slide is going to have all those rules that you need to include in your poem. But of course, if you need to, you can just go back to the beginning of this video and follow through the steps again. So I hope you have fun with that. And remember, if you really liked this video, give it a like, click subscribe so you can see more videos just like this one. And I'll see you guys later on.